Hooray, cisnormative communities and cisnormative environments and cisnormative businesses and cisnormative lawmakers. Hooray that after millennia of gender diverse individuals existing in the world, that you finally are starting to create a space where they are not attacked as much. Hello, fellers and dwellers. Welcome to another episode of Dwhell On It, a series where I, Taylor, answer your questions about my lived experience as a trans woman. If you're new to the channel, I just explained how it goes. So if this is up your alley, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. And for anyone who's not new to the channel and hasn't subscribed yet, please make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. If you enjoy the content, right, please make sure to hit that like button too. Liking, of course, lets me know that you enjoy it, and please make sure to share this as well. The content is about helping gain trans visibility and some awareness and some education, some understanding, some humanization, and all those funny syllables. So being able to share the content means so much to me. I can only speak to who I'm able to speak to. I say all the time that my reach is only as far as I can reach, and so you, the viewer, the listener, are so helpful in making sure that new people and more people are able to check this content out too. Before I get into anything else, I always enjoy doing a visual description as well. So I'm in my living room / gym / office, as I always enjoy saying. Same beige walls as usual. Apparently I'm very bad with my camera. We can see a little bit of a lamp off to the side. It's midday right now with the blinds a little bit open, so it is a little bright behind me, but not as bright as in previous episodes. I've got part of my gym behind me. They're my cardio equipment units there, so I've got my recumbent bike, my elliptical, and right behind me is my treadmill, which we probably can't see unless I really move. I'm still sticking with that nobody looks good in gray thing, and so I'm wearing a gray long sleeve top. It's a thinner top. It's middle of summer. I'm definitely not wearing a hoodie today, but it is muggy in here because the air conditioner on my wall is off again, so I'm gonna take a look to see how so this gets later. In the meantime, it is a blue and purple based color palette. I've got long straightened blonde hair, surprised that it's still relatively straightened at this point, and it's swept over the left side of my face. Then we can see my 3 dermal piercings underneath my right eye in a small, medium, large fashion going outwards towards a cluster earring at the top of my right ear. I've got 2 stud piercings as well, where we can see the one right now. I've got a nose piercing. I've never mentioned it before, but I've got a super basic chain that I've just enjoyed for as long as I've had it, and I've never taken this chain off. Mind you, if you notice, I've actually never changed any of my jewelry otherwise, aside from this cluster earring when it was acting up and I had a hoop ring just for a tiny period of time, but I've never changed my jewelry otherwise. But this has been on for, we're getting close to 2 years in a row without ever coming off, so I've got a small chain as well. I am a 6'1" white transgender woman. As I said, my name is Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is Treaty 1 territory, and I think we can get right into this episode again today. What are the biggest turning points of a trans person's life? Loaded. Loaded. Every trans person's journey is unique, so that's kind of loaded. It honestly kind of reminds me of the question that I answered. Oh man, honestly, I don't even remember. Was it last week? But it was like, when does my transition end? And I talked about how journeys are dynamic in there too. So I know I talked about it kind of, so I'm going to put a link right here. Up here is going to be discussing when transition ends, just to segue slightly. But biggest turning points of a trans person's life, otherwise, I'll use some that come to me for my experience. I can't say this globally across the board. The day that I finally got the courage to pick up the phone and call for trans healthcare was a huge moment in my life for a few reasons. I'm not going to point to a video in this one because it was slightly topical, but I have mentioned previously about how I hate outbound phone calls. I hate outbound phone calls. So when I originally tried entering trans healthcare, I was trying to do it by email, and they're like, no, call us. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm never going to transition then. I got the courage to pick up the phone and make the phone call, but doing that and being like, okay, here I am. Okay. A turning point that probably should have been a big moment for me would have been when I first took my prescription, right, for the very first time. Lots of trans individuals celebrate that moment, and I don't think that goes without a surprise. For me, it was just a day, it was just a moment, and I think because the way that my life was feeling at that time, I was just so... everything was gray. but in seriousness, it was just, everything was just such a muddle that it's like, all right, fine, I'll take the prescription. Hopefully this will go ahead and metaphorically and literally save my life, right? And so I'm like, all right, well, here goes. It's not even here goes nothing. It's here goes everything. And it probably should have been more celebrated than it was, but that is a huge moment for many people. I can even rewind a little bit because this is anecdotal to that episode I was linking just a few moments ago, but kind of acknowledging your gender identity in contrast to your sex assigned at birth, for example, can be a huge moment for many trans individuals. I've never experienced that moment personally because I've known from my earliest memories that I did not belong in all the boxes that I kept getting put into, so I never had that euphoria moment of, oh my gosh. However, I learned more in terms of like language about trans individuals as I grew up, but that just helped me understand better how to like comprehend how I felt, not a general discovery of, oh my gosh, I never realized that this is what it is, or so on. So that could of course be a huge moment, of course, for a trans person's life because, you know, hey, welcome to the party. Acceptance from peers from a past life. You know, when you come out, you're stuck somewhat in a world of limbo because depending on how you come out, you might be coming out and also leaving everything from a past life and walking more openly into a life that you kind of already structured. And what I mean by that is many trans individuals will have a, what's that online word? Avatar, I guess. Like I've always kept Brad separate from Taylor. But when I came out, I didn't delete Brad. I overwrote Brad with Taylor as much as possible. But many people will delete their past life, and whether it's online or any previous connections with anyone else they've had in life before, whether they moved to another city or another country, or so on, they have left their past life because of whatever the traumas are or whatever that they don't want to affiliate with, and however it may go, they want this life to not be polluted with the harm that was caused in the past. I never did that because I believed strongly in the idea that I wouldn't be the person who I am without being the person who I've been. Right? And I'm okay with that. I'm not endorsing nor suggesting not to do it or whatever, but that's always kind of been my personal policy. So of course, one thing that comes along with that is how would people from a past life react? I went into it or went through it expecting and assuming utter rejection, isolation, ostracization, and so on. I expected all of those things. But when people who were important to me from a past life, and you know, whether it's from coworkers or teammates or people who are close to me emotionally or so on, when they continue to stand beside me and you know that you're not going through this journey by yourself, that is such a huge moment to take away as well. And sometimes it's again, I don't know why I'm using the word topical. This is the second time I've used the word like in this year, but it could be as topical as like a coworker not blinking and you're like, oh, okay, cool. This is all cool. Everything's cool. Good. Hey, good. That could be huge. But sometimes, as I just mentioned with other examples of individuals, they've already got a different community that is embracing them with open arms, right? You know, they've got a community that they've built and have given them the comfort and confidence and the security of knowing that as they transition, they are already welcomed and so on and so on and so on, which of course is a feeling that it's so difficult to describe unless you experience it yourself. And speaking of experiencing feelings, one of my biggest epiphany moments was it was the day that I decided to start filing for my legal name change from some stuff I was going through with life or whatever. I just had this epiphany, this euphoria moment of I don't care what other people think anymore, and to just release myself from worrying about the world around me and focus on me, not focus on my transition so that other people are as comfortable with it as they can be, or focus on my transition in such a way that it doesn't disrupt the lives of other people, or try to loosen my boundaries so that people can, you know, adapt at their rate instead of my rate, or so on. To take all of those feelings and be like, no, this is you. Transitioning, of course, involves people around you. I think that's something that doesn't get discussed enough, is that transitioning socially is also a transition for everybody around you as well. Using the example that I mentioned earlier about people from a past life, they also had to transition too in their own way. They had to change their habits and their understanding. They needed to get into a habit of using a proper name now. They had to get into a habit of looking at me as who I am, not the person that I presented, and so on. And knowing that I also had to give them a little bit of forgiveness and coaching and understanding if they ever had hiccups or slip-ups. But just the same as they had to allow me the space to express myself more openly and so on, as well as I continue to venture into my authentic life too. The social transition is often considered in the perspective of the individual transitioning physically, medically, and so on, and rightfully so. Right? Hey, this is the stage right here. I'm not editing that out. But the people around are also going through their own form of transition too. And so there has to be some understanding on their ability to walk along with that as well. But when it's all said and done, that's still their own responsibilities. And for me to just say, I don't care about how it makes anyone else feel. I don't care about if they're happy or not. I don't care if this is important to them or not. Or I don't care. This is about me. And I am damned happy that I finally recognized that. Was such a euphoric moment. I don't know how to really explain that. Kind of like the last point that I was saying is like, you kind of don't know it until you experience it. So sorry for everyone being like, can you put it in words? No, I'm doing the best that I can. There's some other moments that I'm sure are huge. Maybe being in a relationship, entering a relationship as a trans individual for the first time, feeling love and stuff like that. Oh boy, I've spoken about love at length in other episodes, and how am I going to frame it without sounding like a sap? I haven't been in a relationship since I've transitioned. I haven't been in a relationship since 2018, but that's aside the point. I've talked about that at length as well, and I don't want to start hogging all the links right now. Take a look at previous episodes, chapters, bookmarks, this and that. Maybe there'll be something hiding in the corner if I've got a free link to throw, but I've spoken about relationships in the past, but finding happiness and comfort as a trans individual for the first time could be huge, because then you would get that feeling of, you're still loved, you're still accepted, you're still wanted, instead of being perpetually objectified or sexualized or fetishized, if not ostracized or ignored or whatever, right? But to actually be seen and accepted as a human being and feel those feels, for sure, that could be a massive turning point. If that happens one day, I'll let you know. Other things, in a month-ish, I've mentioned multiple times at length too, where, assuming the date doesn't get rescheduled, I've got an orchie on deck. That to me is the only, I guess this counts as a major surgery, even though it's a day surgery, but it's I keep saying orchie like people are supposed to know what that is, and I try to just allude to it by saying I'm 41 and I'm not having kids, but to be clear about it, it is a surgical removal of the testes. To just make it clear, I believe it's pronounced orchiectomy or something along those lines. And again, multiple people may have an orchie for however it may go, whether they've got an injury in the area where that is a solution, they might have testicular cancer. In my case as a trans woman, I don't need the luggage and I'm not having kids anyway, so stuff like that. But I'm not having any major surgeries. I'm not interested in anything like a vaginoplasty or facial feminization surgery or breast augmentation or anything along those lines. Those surgeries of all types, the scheduling, undergoing of the surgery, the recovery, the feeling after, depending on what the surgeries are and the level of happiness, those can all be major turning points too. Not to trivialize it, but I'll just use a BA for an example. But you wake up, right? Even though you're still on the bed, but you wake up and all of a sudden your chest is a little heavier and it might give you a more comfortable feeling with your body. I can't pretend to imagine what that feels like, but I can certainly say that undergoing that surgery and waking up with, what at the time certainly appears to be no complications could be a massive feeling for people to feel more confident and comfortable with themselves. And this is only speaking on perspective of a trans woman. Remember as well that when it comes to trans men or non-binary individuals or many other gender diverse individuals, I can even just say the opposite for trans men to have a top surgery, for example, and, pun fully intended, but to have that weight off their chest. And again, to just have that affirming surgery and be able to look down and, and there, right? Those are massive turning points. Geez, I can go on and on and on, but just to think of things that like go along with oppressions or struggles. Getting a job, holding a job, keeping a job. Depending on where you live, there's lots of places where having a job could be questionable, or, you're transitioning, or you're known to be trans and you're applying for a job and you're not rejected because you're trans, but coincidentally enough and conveniently enough, another applicant was more qualified. Those types of things. So just knowing that you're still able to continue to go through life and still have ability and footprint in situations as other people who wouldn't be experiencing those same types of complications. Those are all huge, huge, huge examples. So I don't have it's this, here's the checklist of all the things, much the same as when it comes to when does a transition end and so on. But there are a lot of things, right? Like for anyone listening to this right now, think of all of those things that I've mentioned that just get taken for granted as just part of life. Going back to something like a relationship, lots of people, it's just like, I just can't find a partner because insert reason. But there's no other reason aside from the fact that you just haven't met that person that you sparked with or whatever. But then when you realize that you start to add other vulnerabilities as to, okay, well, now the dating pool is thinner and thinner and thinner. Now the job searching pool is thinner and thinner and more difficult. Now that this is more difficult. Now that is more difficult. Now that whatever is happening finally, so I feel comfortable with my body. Now this is fine. So now I can feel a little more mentally comfortable. Like all of those things. So many people just take those things for granted because they don't realize how nice it is to just be able to have those things because of who you are, or oftentimes who you are not. Like I said, there's no checklist, but believe me, when a trans individual is sharing a moment of something that is exciting to them, there's a reason for that. And it's because it's been something that's been a value that's been important to them, and they're finally able to attain it with authenticity, with happiness, with a quiet mind and just an appreciation of being able to have that moment finally as the person who they are. And I think something like that needs to get recognized a lot more frequently and celebrated a lot more accordingly too. How do you be grateful for anything when all we face are hate and abuse and transphobia by everyone? Now I know I wrote this down relatively recently, so I'm going to assume that this is related to, I don't remember exactly how that question that I answered was phrased, but it was along the lines of not having guilt or remorse for a past life, because I do remember mentioning in that dialogue about having gratitude for my past life. So this just might be coincidental in that, but in the meantime, since I'm on a finger pointing spree, I'm going to just link that answer to that question right here. And I even alluded to it in the previous question about how I wouldn't be who I am today without who I've been previously. And I have to have gratitude for that life experience to be where I am. Back to the question about how can I be grateful when all we face are these negative things? I want to make it clear, I do not subscribe to there's always a bright side to everything, look for the silver lining in whatever the situation is, there's always a silver lining and so on, because the more and more that you experience a life of being in a vulnerable position or in a marginalized community or so on, the more you realize that a lot of those statements come from people who come from a position of privilege. That said, it is very important to still have an appropriate outlook on life, the world around you, so that you can cope with it well. So those are two different things that often tend to overlap, where a strong mental appreciation and approach to the world around you is very fundamental on being able to just kind of operate, successfully and, like in a healthy way and so on. But then the other side where it's like, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. It's like, well, you can't continue to ignore the world around you by just yelling good vibes at things, right? You can't just preach good vibes and all of a sudden all the nonsense that's happening goes away. It doesn't work like that. As a matter of fact, toxic positivity is absolutely a thing. Right here, this was something that I brought up about Sport Manitoba and one of their advertisements that they did with Bison Transport. And in that advertisement, was a very gaslighty, toxic positivity type of statement. Toxic positivity is harmful. Toxic positivity is not good. It's in the name. It's toxic. Back to the point on the question. It's not like any time that I experience anything that would be considered oppressive or transphobic or bigoted or however it may go, that I don't go, well, at least I've got my health. Yeah, at least I've got my fridge full. At least I've got whatever. I don't dismiss the situation at hand by just gobbling up all the sunshine and the unicorns and the sparkles of something good otherwise. Is it good to remember of the positive things that you have when you feel like you're struggling in a situation? For sure. But to me, that also doesn't solve the situation at hand. Experiencing transphobia and then being like, at least I'm grateful that I can work out at my leisure. That's weird. Doesn't work like that. So I think this might have kind of like generalized the word grateful by thinking that, you know, everything is magical and everything is great. That is 100% not my stance. But like I said, I can't have remorse and self-pity or anger or frustration or whatever from before, because it's happened, it's done. Just to, you know, without really repeating that episode, but please check it out if you haven't yet. But what I have an obligation to feel is gratitude, and the reason for that for me is very logical. I wouldn't be who I am today without who I've been. The person who I've been from my very first steps all the way to the moment where I sat down in this chair and started recording, I've continued to build and develop myself. I will always have my past build, develop, and be a foundation for my present and my future. And that goes ongoing. When this recording is done, I'm going to take what experience I've had during this time and use that as a foundation for the rest of my day, and so on. And I have to have gratitude for knowing that I'm building myself to the future that I want to have, and so on. I think that might kind of clarify where that is coming from, because otherwise I'm not grateful for the world around me. I'm not grateful for any systems that are like, oh, we're introducing queer policies. No, congratulations. Hooray you. Hooray cisnormative communities in cisnormative environments and cisnormative businesses and cisnormative lawmakers. Hooray that after millennia of gender diverse individuals existing in the world, that you finally are starting to create a space where they are not attacked as much or slightly protected more should there be any violations against them. Hooray! So I don't have gratitude for those types of things, because it's more like a, yeah, it's about time type of thing. Is it wrong to be happy that those things happen? It's better than nothing, right? Like, I'm not going to be the type of person to say, no, you know, you should be 100% or nothing, because frankly, everybody who is being oppressive or upholding oppressive and non-inclusive policies should have gotten up to speed a millennia ago. But I'm also not going to go ahead, look a gift horse in the mouth, reject it, and say, come back and be better. I'm going to take what's taken and say, now more, because you're not done. Now more. So I don't give gratitude for these little micro steps that cis people shout out to themselves to celebrate their concept of inclusion, and giving high fives to each other, being like, hey, look, we wrote down that it's nice to be nice to trans people. We're so cool, aren't we? I don't have gratitude for that. I think that's hopefully, like I said, maybe a little more clarification about, you know, when it comes to how do I be grateful. It's not putting on the rose-colored glasses and just creating a happy story out of any situation. It's acknowledging the values and the positives that are part of where the situation is. And I think on a closing note, just to maybe kind of like help kind of underline that, it's like, you know, when I experience online abuse, for example, I don't be like, well, at least I have a computer. I'm conscious that, you know, I have a computer. Many people don't have a computer. I don't need to remind myself that. I'm like, at least I have a computer that I can be threatened on. That's super fun, isn't it? It's being grateful for knowing what my journey is, how it got me to where I am, and where it's taking me, even though the world around me is trying to stop me in my tracks. What is something that you would never forgive? If we're going to stay on the topic of psychology, I guess. Okay, so something I learned a long time ago, and this is completely unrelated to my transition, as a matter of fact, and I don't even remember the circumstance that brought this up, but it really helped when I started to better understand that forgiveness is not the same as accepting the violation that's been done or being obligated to forget that it happened. What forgiveness is a way of saying, I am not letting the harm and the emotional trauma, or however you want to define it, of this event that violated me control me. I'm not going to allow you to have power over me by this violation that has been unresolved, or however it goes. I'm sticky on forgiveness because I also feel very strongly that to forgive someone, they also must first acknowledge the harm, represent guilt, and so on, because I feel like handing forgiveness out like candy, like someone drops a brick on my toes and before they even have a chance to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so clumsy, are you okay? And doing anything to, like, do you have bandages, can I help you out? And be like, oh, it's okay, I forgive you. Give a moment for the other person to recognize the harm that they have caused before you start giving them the power of controlling the situation that happened. Going back to the brick dropping example, if I automatically said, no, don't worry about it, now that person who dropped that brick, this is a weird example, but I'm running with it since I'm here. But if they drop that brick, then be like, oh, okay, cool. Indestructible feet, or no feeling in the toes, or they don't care, or I can be clumsy now, or whatever it is. Instead of them recognizing the harm that's been caused and doing better to make sure that that harm doesn't happen again, you're just giving them the hall pass by saying, no, don't worry about it. So forgiveness, there's still like, a before and after before forgiveness happens. Now, in terms of what is something that I would never forgive, I can't imagine that, because I don't let people have control over me like that. There are things that I've experienced I will not forget. I don't have anything that I would never forgive. These examples that I'm mentioning, I've currently not given forgiveness because there's also not been an admission of guilt. And until that gets addressed and reconciled, or however it may go, any parties involved with that type of stuff, I have zero faith, zero trust, zero involvement, zero engagement, zero whatever with them. So instead of worrying about forgiving or not forgiving or anything like that, it's just in my head, I was like, this situation, whatever it is, however it goes, whether it's from people from a past life, or whether it's from people who have not held up to obligations, or people who have, violated myself as an individual, or whatever it may be, I don't worry about guilt or forgiveness or so on. At this point, it's just, I want nothing to do with anything involving insert thingamajig, because it's just proven to not be conducive to a healthy and a nurturing environment and so on. It's not that I would never forgive something. I'm also not going to think that something is too extreme to forgive. It's just in that medium time, I'm not going to hand forgiveness out like candy, and instead, until a reconciliation happens, I will keep whatever it is that is proven to be harmful or dangerous or toxic or untrustworthy or whatever it may be. I will keep that at a distance until, the awareness and the recognition of guilt or so on happens. I feel like that was kind of a really silly answer, because I could have just said nothing, but I don't think that's really a clear and a reliable answer, I think, is a good way, because then it's like, well, why? It sounds almost like you're being really altruistic or so on. Forgiveness, by definition, is power control, right? I'm not letting this situation have control over me. And so for me, since I am not forgiving a situation that is unreconciled, whatever it may be, I'm also still not letting it have that power, because I've disassociated from anything that would be related that has caused harm as well. It'd be a different story is if I was obligated to be stuck in an environment with someone who has continually harmed me, for example, or stuck in a place that everywhere that I go, it continues to dehumanize me, or whatever it may be. If I'm stuck in a situation where I don't have control over disassociating from what is harmful, then that's going to be a point where I would start addressing forgiveness more assertively, because it's like, I don't want to be here. I can't be here. This isn't healthy to be here. And I'm not getting that power balance back. We're not getting back to an equilibrium of, recognizing harm is getting caused, but I'm obligated to continue to endure it type of thing. That's something where forgiveness and guilt might start to become more of a conversation, because the power equilibrium is not being allowed to get addressed. But in this case, as I just mentioned with other examples of stuff in the past life or whatever it may go, my way to manage that equilibrium is by disassociating with whatever it is that has, shown to be harmful or toxic or not nurturing or whatever it may be. And then until there's an admission of guilt, which brings power equilibrium back to me, then I offer forgiveness to create that power equilibrium again, and then disassociate and say, okay, now that it's back to neutral, I still want nothing to do with anything. This forgiveness isn't a hall pass to just be back in my life or whatever. Long, silly, philosophical answer. Whatever, let's run with it. What are your religious and political views? How much more philosophy do we need? So I grew up as a Roman Catholic. For me, in school, it was school, and I just kind of went through the motions because it's just like, did my math and everything like that, but, doing the Catholic private school thing. But it never resonated with me. As early as I was able to stop feeling obligated to go to stuff like church and whatever, I did. And a lot of it was just because there was a lot of hypocrisy. Because remember, as I've mentioned from earlier this episode, many other episodes, I've known from the earliest memories of mine that I've been put into boxes that did not align with who I am as an individual. And school was no different. It was just difficult to kind of sit through that weirdness and the hypocrisy of it, right? To hear the messaging, but also not feeling accepted and included, and so on, right? So I recognized such a weird, hypocritical situation about church and me from so long ago. As soon as I was able to stop being compelled to go to church, I did. So my religious position now, what is it? Is it atheist agnostic? So I don't know how to describe it off the top of my head. There's no evidence of, Magic Spaghetti Man, but there's also no evidence of of Magic Spaghetti Man. A question I answered a long time ago, where if I was able to have one thing solved in a lifetime, is the origin of the universe. Because that's always been such a wonderful mystery for me. Like if there was, someone hit the go button, I'd love to know that. And if there was a way to correlate like a higher being, like perhaps even in a fourth dimension, for example, there's a lot of paradoxes and theories about like multiverses and, and higher beings and so on, but with no empirical evidence of someone be like, hi, here I am. It's kind of tough to swallow, right? I don't follow religion. I am perfectly happy with people having religion, even though I'm not a fan of religion. And a lot of that is because, and it's going to kind of be painted with kind of a really broad stroke, and I acknowledge that I'm saying it like this, and it's just because there are a lot of religions out there, and I'm not studied on all of them, so I guess I'm especially pointing towards, the most major ones. But it's not difficult to cross paths with someone whose religion also includes gender inequity, or transphobia, homophobia, and so on. It's not difficult to cross paths with people who float religion, but then also use their religion as a reason to be discriminatory. So I struggle with religion in that sense, but I do fully believe in the notion of faith. I believe it's important for people to have faith. Faith is actually one of the very important pillars of quality mental health. So I don't dismiss religion. I don't follow religion. I'd love to see a correlation between the concept of magical spaceman and science. Like if that was able to just get fundamentally proven, that would just be so neat. I'm not going to lie. It'd be super neat, but I'm also not holding my breath for it because I don't believe it'll happen. But if it did happen, I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. So does that answer that? I hope it answers it. I just don't like how religion is weaponizing discrimination more than ever. Political views. In a past life, I did present a very, big surprise, white cis het individual, and oftentimes, I don't know if I would say I had conservative ideologies, but I have voted blue, at least in Canada. Like it's just kind of weird in political media, especially when mentioning elections, because in Canada, liberals often red and the Conservative Party blue. And then you compare that to the US, where Democratic Party is blue and the Republican Party is red. However, in Canada, we've got even more, right? There's orange and green and purple and whatever else. But anyway, I did vote blue a couple times in the past, and it's just because the way that my mind was positioned was, I didn't feel I was getting harmed, and, everything seemed fine where I live and everything's going on. And sure, I had this notion of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I threw my ballot in for that. And holy shit, was it broke. Oh my God. And that's kind of like a lot of the like, wow, okay, now actually allowing myself to be more conscious and be aware of the world around me. I'm going to use this as a really good example. I was an undecided voter when I spoke to Aaron O'Toole on CBC The National on Face to Face. I'll put a link to a recent review I had to the Ombudsman's review of my presentation for that, and I'm literally linking that one because inside that one are links to go to the episode and so on, so I'm pretty much trying to get as much as I can in one finger point. So the episode's going to be right here. Big surprise, there'd be a lot of people online saying that, oh, it's a plant or whatever, right? As if I wasn't undecided. I knew what the Liberal Party would have said. I knew what the NDP party would have said. I was not interested in what the Green Party was going to say. I wanted to know if anything that I said would have gotten an affirmation to get my vote again, because I voted blue before I transitioned too. Did I feel confident that it would have happened? No. But if they said the right things of mandating something like sports inclusion, if I was able to get the conversation to that, or if like introducing, yes, mandate this, it would have at least given me more to think about. What ended up happening after that conversation was just reinforcing how I just can't trust the Conservative Party at any point now. That's not even to say, though, that the NDP party or the Liberal Party or whatever is going to get all of my praise and glory, because the one thing that I noticed with both of those parties too, neither of them are really excited to bring up trans individuals or to, promote trans individuals in any of their platforms. Any comments that they had during the election, the federal election particularly, it was like footnotes, right? Or like stuff buried within other stuff. There was no like, hey, trans people are people too type of stuff. So there's a lot of transphobia just in Canadian politics as it is, not unlike American politics. So let's just take all the existing parties out of the picture, though. It goes without saying that I'm definitely on the left side, but I do acknowledge, I don't want to use the word necessities because that is not my argument. I'd love to see just a complete overhaul, right? I'd love to see just a complete overhaul where it's just, finally back in a situation where everyone legitimately cares about the next person, right? Without a very, capitalist, corporate sort of world and so on. But the problem with that too is that, you can't have like a community or a country or whatever on an island. Well, unless you're Australia. But anyway, right? Like you can't be isolated from the world. Unless you can. Like, I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. Like, if there was a way to prove, for example, that Canada can literally be completely isolated and ostracized from any of the political influence of the rest of the world around it, I'd love to know that. Because it would help me just, lean a little more into these ideas of, kind of like just getting rid of all the crap that we have right now is probably the best way to put it. But like, as far as it goes, that no matter what we want for our community or our province or state, right, or country or however it may go, that there's still going to be an outside influence that is going to have some political leverage too, which is also going to drive what type of governance and political ideologies you have to succeed with nations around you, whether it comes to stuff like trade or whatever. I don't really know what my political position is in terms of like a flat definition, just because I acknowledge the necessity of working economically, right? Like successfully economically with other nations. And largely those are related to, money, frankly. And that's usually on one side of the political spectrum that it works with. But that's kind of where it ends for me. And I'd love to know more, to be completely honest. Because otherwise my values would, no surprise, stop relying on police because they're fundamentally harmful. ACAB, defund the police, right? Put the excessive amount of funding that goes to police towards social services and community services, and work on developing stronger neighborhoods, work with stronger communities so that you can help the underprivileged individuals to have a much more inclusive place, right? A place of belonging where, it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from. You have just as much of a fighting chance as everyone else. I can go on and on. I'm sure everyone knows exactly where I'm going with things from there. It's just really difficult because anytime I think on, let's just call it that, what might present as a right-wing side, it's just because of an acknowledgement of how do we make sure to stay economically viable, right? I absolutely believe in ensuring that, our organizations have such a less capitalistic structure and combating climate change and all those other things that I don't think are much of a surprise for someone like me to say, but I'm just very conscious that the only way to work economically is also to work in unison with the rest of the nations of the world. And unless there is a global shift politically where everybody works the same way, I don't know how we can accomplish those I would call them ideals as just a very isolated and secure nation. I'd love to know how to accomplish something like that without having, fundamental dictatorship like North Korea, for example, right? That's certainly not my goal. I'd love to be the country that can survive by itself, and I don't even know if North Korea can survive by itself. I'm sure there's lots of trade happening. Trade with China, if I remember correctly. But anyway, I don't want to get into global politics like that. But I think what I'm trying to say is, first, there's a lot of rambling in this episode, but second is I want, of course, as much of a left-leaning political system. No political system would be great, but obviously I'm getting, rambly there. But obviously it'd be left-leaning because it's more about the people and the values and uplifting community and so on like that. But to just succeed in a way that we can still, be part of the rest of the world around us too, without being penalized or compromised for our very less capitalistic type of structure, if that makes sense. I'd love to be proven that it's possible. And if anyone knows that it's possible and can share information with me about that, please do. I'd love to learn about how to accomplish something like that. What is the most difficult thing to understand about transphobes? I don't know. Because I've never put energy into trying to understand transphobes, if that makes sense. If anything, lots of times it's more who hurt you and I'm sorry. Transphobes operate out of misinformation. They operate out of fear. I believe that it was in my Trans Awareness Week videos, well, I'm going to link it right here, that there was a publication about not just transphobes, but bigots in general, or literally lack, the stuff that makes science work. They lack critical thinking. So it's really difficult to be bothered to try to understand, people who are just fundamentally not in a position to be able to do more than screech. And I don't even try to bother understanding why the systems continue to allow transphobia to exist, because the answer is simple. It's the people who fund organizations that give transphobia a safe space are largely transphobes, right? Or they house transphobes, or they're supported by transphobes. Follow the money. That's how it always goes. Follow the money. So I don't put energy into understanding transphobes. I just want to understand more as to why we continue to allow systems that enable transphobia and then spend money on combating transphobia. I understand that it's all a show. I get it, right? I'm not making it sound like I don't understand it. It's literally not a show or a cost of operation, if we want to put it like that. I just find it astounding that at a human level, people are okay with that. Does that kind of make sense? That at a human level, that there's someone who's yeah, no, this is fine. It's stuff like that that kind of astounds me. It's not understanding transphobes as, who they are individually and how they operate and so on, because I'd like to consider myself pretty well versed in that universe. But it's just how can you be like that type of thing. I can't understand how people are like that. That's probably more than anything that I don't understand about transphobes. But that's just I don't understand how people can just be so vile. That's kind of a weird way to end the last question, but well, it happened, so I was going to make a vile pun, but whatever. Let it run. Thank you so much for taking time through this rather longer episode. I really appreciate you going through this little journey with me here. If you enjoyed the content, please of course make sure to hit like, and please also make sure to hit that share button too, so that other people who are not familiar with this content are going to get an opportunity to check it out. I really appreciate you helping promote this platform, and also if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button. Stay subscribed so that you can stay up to speed with any new content when it gets uploaded. I upload Dwhell On It at least once a week. If you'd like to have questions of your own included in a future episode, please make sure to add them by comments or by DM, and you'll see them show up in a future episode, as I mentioned, as they get pulled out of the grab bag. And also in the description is a link to a campaign hosted by New Mode. I talked a lot about business and politics and whatnot, and this is a value that actually means a lot to me, and it's not by want, but it's just acknowledging the universe that we're in right now. And so with that, as you know, capitalism is a thing, and until capitalism ends, we have to strive to get the most out of it that we can for the communities that capitalistic empires and ventures exist in. To put it into people talk, businesses, organizations, companies, the like, right? That link, it's a call to action to encourage political leaders to just get those facilities to optimize their CSR, their corporate social responsibility, so that they can make sure that the communities that they operate out of are safe and equitable and, you know, nurturing for the vulnerable people who are in those communities, those neighborhoods as well. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this one up. So, like I said, like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed this. Please make sure to hit that link. It takes less than a minute. Name, email address, postal code. Pre-written letters already there, so hit send. It gets sent off to the elected officials that are related to the postal code that you're part of. Yes, I pulled my hair to the side even though I was a few seconds from being done, and this is a cut, but my hair was getting kind of funny and I want the outro to look nice. So I hope you have a great rest of your night. Have a great rest of your week, as I always enjoy saying too, and